be here on a Thursday once again and see all your smiling faces. It's wonderful to be a Rotarian and be back together again. I'm going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, but I first wanted to share that I have my flag, and this is the flag that I received when I became an American citizen 2 years ago. So I thought it was apropos that I bring the flag to our opportunity to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if everybody could take themselves off of mute, that would be great. And let's start. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, more or less. Okay. So everybody, if you would please mute, that would be wonderful, so we can reduce the ambient sounds. I was looking through the group. Do we have any guests with us today? I mean, we have some people who are on vacation right now from a distance. So welcome, Stan. We're happy you're here. You're on mute.
I was going to say I finally made it, but a few minutes late.
It's okay. It's okay. We've got 12 o'clock. So it's, what time is it with you?
It's only 10, but I found out we are, in fact, on daylight. No, standard time, not daylight. That's why I was off by an hour.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming in on your vacation.
Sure.
I hope you're having a good time.
Yep.
So, are there any other guests with us? I think they're all Rotarians who are here today. Wonderful. Just have a couple of different announcements, and I'll give an opportunity at the end if anybody else wants to share announcements. But Steve, would you like to talk a little bit about your upcoming virtual wine tasting? You're also on mute.
I'd love to. On Thursday the 17th, 5:30, we'll have our second wine tasting. I thought the first one went very well. I was real happy with the participation. We had a lot of fun. We'll be tasting Liberty School Cabernet. Some of us have a 2018 and some of us have a 2017, which will give us the opportunity to compare two vintages with each other. So I would recommend that if you want to join and you want a tasting journal, just shoot me an email at snoel@noelnet.com, and I'll send out another invitation next week. And get your Liberty School Cabernet early. We had a lot of people that couldn't find the Sauvignon Blanc that we tried last week. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. So we had a board meeting on Tuesday, and at the board meeting we discussed trying to once again look at some in-person meetings, maybe just like one a month, and see how that goes, because the survey we did a little while ago indicated some people were interested in trying some in-person meetings as long as we can be socially distant and also be able to use masks. And so we are exploring an in-person meeting in October. And so Steve, you're working with with our upcoming speaker to see which date works for them. But we will also be definitely doing Zoom or videoing it, so there's an opportunity. But we think we can do it with Zoom so that we can have some engagement for people still who are at home, and we can kind of live in the best of both worlds and give that a try. So we're excited about that. Our speaker today, I'm going to turn it over to Steve so he can do the introduction, but I'm really excited about our speakers. So take it away, Steve.
Thank you, President Moraine, or President-elect Murray.
I'm not
Rich
president.
Drinon is our speaker today. He's president of Drinon and Associates, was previously owner of Executive Edge. He started his business in Topeka in 1986 and since has conducted thousands of training and coaching sessions for organizations and individuals throughout the U.S. and Canada. He has a journalism degree from the University of New Mexico, a master's degree in leadership communication from Gonzaga University, and a graduate level certificate in leadership coaching from Avila University. Rich is a professional certified coach through the International Coach Federation. He was born and raised in Maine. In 1976, he moved to Kansas City to attend Bible college and then to Albuquerque, where he graduated from the University of New Mexico. He came to Kansas in 1986 and has spent the last 34 years in Topeka and Manhattan. Rich and his wife Amy recently renovated a home between Luce Park and the Plaza in Kansas City, Missouri, where they finished moving a week ago. He currently facilitates leadership communication coaching for executives and management teams. Through a combination of group and individual coaching sessions, team members experience personal growth and greater team synergy. Coaching is focused on 4 key competencies of building relationships, achieving results through others, influencing change, and making decisions. He conducts his work on site regionally and by phone or video conference nationally. Today he will be presenting, If You Can't Communicate, How Can You Lead? Take it away, Rich.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve. Well, officially, good afternoon, everyone. I'm hoping you can hear me clearly. I've discovered that my new office, this part of Kansas City, does not have the best connectivity, oddly enough. So I'm coming to you by cell phone and then the video camera from my desk. So, Steve, interrupt me at any point if you think I'm not coming through clearly, and I will make adjustments.
Okay. You're doing great, but go ahead and put your PowerPoint up because all we can see is your phone symbol because that's the on our video.
Yes. Okay.
Thanks.
I'm going to put that up now. It's funny, I already have a signal. Your internet connection is unstable. So let's see if this will, there. Tell me when that shows up.
It's coming. There you go.
All right. Now let's see if I can actually get its page up and down. That would be nice as well. See what we can do here. Okay. Well, it seems to be stuck at the moment. We'll see as I go if it will unstick itself here. All right. So good to be with all of you this morning and to see a number of people on camera that I've known over the years. Over the last 32 years, I have spoken to Downtown Rotary 5 times that I can remember, this being the 5th. And so with that in mind, I would anticipate being back with you in 2006, April or May to be more exact. So we'll see how that works out. But today, I gave a lot of thought this morning to the focus. And one thing that came to mind was the need to be heard. So if I might start with just a little bit of bad news. The need to be heard, practically all of us have challenges with someone at some time in relation to that need. The good news is we can make adjustments to be better heard by others, and as a result, have them respond favorably and get on board with whatever the objective may be or the request. Let's see, I'm still attempting to get my PowerPoint open here. And let's see what I can do with this. All right. Well, it's on slide 2, so I'm just going to work from there. Communicating as a leader. The framework from which I'm operating would be history and ELT, which is also referred to as evolutionary leadership theory. And though it does have some of its roots actually in evolution in our biology as human beings and how that impacts communication, it really just has a lot more to do with what's helped humans survive as a species over the course of time. And certainly one of those key things is communication. Steve?
Rich, it's Steve. You're not sharing your screen.
Yeah, it's lost the connection. We may need to go to you for that.
Let me see if I can.
Okay.
Well, that didn't work.
It's on my screen,
Is
Steve.
it?
Yeah, we can see it. It's just in, it's not in slideshow mode.
All right.
Okay.
Let me try this.
Go.
Is that where you want to be, Rich?
I've lost the Zoom connection, so you'll have to tell me what the page says.
Today's session, communicating as a leader.
Yes, good. Okay. And so I'll just simply say next page when I reach the end of one, and we'll make the most of this. So
Very good.
this modern communication. All right. So I do want to talk a little bit today about communicating as a leader, since that's where most of my work has been for the last number of years. And right now I currently work with about 100 leaders per month, men and women, in all different industries across the U.S. And some of them are CEOs of major organizations, and some are newly developing leaders from medium and smaller businesses. So bringing a lot of experience to the table here and sharing this with you, more than just research, but my own experience. The centerpiece for today will be cultivating 4 voices of influence. And I want to talk a little bit about how you can use your voice as a tool, as an instrument, and consciously get better results when you speak. Or perhaps a good word would be more deliberate when you speak in order to get a better result. I'll go to the last part of the presentation by talking about balancing your communication style as you climb the leadership ladder, or as you encourage others to do so, given that some of you are certainly are at the peak of your leadership experience. And then deciding what to master versus what to manage. So those are the items that I'll cover in the next few minutes. Steve, if you would flip to the next screen, and let's see if we can all see the communicating as a leader slide. Everyone got that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So as I began stating earlier, based on the evolution of communication, or leadership, if I should say, and the important role communication plays, it does appear from some of the better studies that I've seen in recent years that verbal skill has a lot to do with a leader's success, and it has a lot to do with how we survived as a species here on planet Earth. So I would say, from my perspective, that verbal skill is your most important ability. Certainly there are many things that are important to a leader, and I would not discount any of those things. But of course, my primary focus is your verbal ability, and in some cases, your written communication. Now, along with that, though, I would pair trust or credibility, because that's your most important asset. And some of you recognize that that word credibility comes from the same root word, credo, credit. So we could look at it as more of like a financial asset. In this case, though, it does have to do with how people trust us. So those two are always working hand in hand. You could also say what comes out of your mouth is one thing, but how much people trust you has a lot to do with whether they hear you clearly or whether you are believable. But bottom line here, results as a leader depends on your ability to influence others to follow and collaborate in pursuit of a worthwhile objective. So that's the description that I use in a lot of my leadership coaching programs. But let's get to the heart of the matter. If you would go to the next slide, cultivating 4 voices of influence. This is something that I work with every day. And can you see that okay, Steve?
Yes.
Okay. This is something that I work with each day with clients. And today I've already worked with 2 or 3 clients starting early this morning, helping them with their communication skills. And I will say that practically everyone I work with is really good at what they do. I tend to not get bozos or people that are truly struggling. Practically every client I have is exceptional, but they are still looking for ways to get better. And the ways that they're looking to get better will, for the most part, be covered in today's program. Now, when you look at these 4 voices of influence, this is what I call them. Some of you will recognize that these words are very similar to perhaps when you took the DISC, D-I-S-C, Behavioral Style Assessment. And I do use that assessment in my work. It's inexpensive, but mostly I use it because it's highly accurate. And it does tie nicely into modern day research on leadership and communication. So it's a good tool for me to use as a frame of reference. And some of you will recognize where I have the word direct. Well, certainly direct is a form of communication. But if you've taken that particular assessment, you know that relates to the dominant personality style. They do speak in a direct manner, and they make up the smaller part of the population, maybe 10 to 12%. The next one, inspiring, there is a personality style called inspiring. Those that tend to be fun, upbeat, and engaging, and so forth. Supportive as a form of influence. That would be the group personality-wise that makes up the biggest part of the population globally. And I think they typically do the lion's share of the work, and they tend to communicate in ways that are warm, friendly, considerate, and so forth. We'll look more closely at that in a moment. And then the 4th voice of influence would be your logical or reasonable voice. Now, over the years, I've told my clients that really the voices that convey more emotion are usually your more persuasive or influential voices. And there's a reason for that, and that is that people are moved more by emotion or feelings than they are facts or reasons. I've seen that as being an unfortunate thing, but that is how humans tend to be wired. But in recent years, I've seen just how vital the logical voice is when you want to get a group of people to calm down, get cool, calm, and collected, become reasonable so they can talk through their differences, or actually focus on problem solving. So I bet each of you on the call today have used that voice many times over the course of your lifetime or career to get people to a better place so they could actually function optimally. So it is a good voice, but in contrast, and I want to be careful what I say today, we'll just simply say if you observe any candidate in any election, and right now it being the presidential election, the emotional appeal usually is a big part of the communication. Now, some of you, maybe all of you, were in the room 4 years ago when I talked about the communication styles of the presidential candidates. And it was a fun time. It was a very popular keynote. A lot of people wanted to listen to what I had to say about my research, my thorough research on the candidates. And I wanted to do that this year, but times have changed. It's become such a, tough conversation to talk about. People will not necessarily hear me as a communication coach as much as somebody talking about politics. So I've minimized that this year. But I may make a few comments about how this comes into play in the election, since it tends to be very visible to most people. All right. So I'm suggesting here that you have within you at least 4 different voices of influence that you can use as instruments or tools to get a better result with others, depending on the situation. And they are, again, direct, inspiring, supportive, or logical. So let's go to the next slide, if you would, Steve. And I'm simply going to take each of these and play them out a little bit more. So I mentioned earlier that some of you have probably taken the DISC Behavioral Style Assessment, It's it's one of the most popular assessments in the U.S., like Myers-Briggs. So a lot of people have taken it. If you haven't taken it, though, you can get a really good sense of your communication style just from these 4 lines. Sometimes I will send clients a preliminary email asking them to rate in order each of these 4 lines, from their primary voice, the one they use most often when communicating with others, to their secondary, and then third and fourth. So you could do that right now. For example, some of you might say, yeah, that top line, that sounds like me much of the time. I'm a very direct individual. Others of you might say, no, direct, that's not how I am most of the time. Most of the time, I'm number 3, supportive, warm, friendly, considerate, and caring. So you can rate yourself in an unofficial sort of way today if you just want to think about your style going forward. For me, for example, my primary style is the top one, direct. But I also have a lot of that fourth style, the logical. So they tend to, one flavors the other. So you kind of get a cold, calculating, direct, logical sort of form of communication from me. Now, if I want to communicate in ways that are warmer, friendlier, or empathetic, I have to stretch myself a little bit because those are not my primary styles. And I work on it every day, but it doesn't always come across in a way that's heard as well as I would like to be heard. For example, my wife says to me, my wife Amy says, Rich, when you attempt to be empathetic, it kind of sounds like you're saying that must really suck for you. So anyway, I keep working on it. But there's your 4 voices. For those of you that suspect you are more direct, usually that includes being not only direct, but bottom line, to the point, cut to the chase, no BS. That would be how you communicate primarily or most of the time. For some of you, you're more inspiring. You tend to be more spontaneous, upbeat, engaging, and fun in your communication. And I had a call from my realtor this morning, and I know that's her primary style, so I try to shift to that form of communication so I can better relate with her and hopefully achieve a result and be heard according to her style. The next group, supportive, warm, friendly, considerate, and caring. I know there are a lot of you in the group that would fit that style because I've met you in the past. And then finally, those of you that are more logical, factual, and personal, reasonable, and cautious in your communication. So again, what I would encourage you to do with this page is just try to number it in the order that you think you communicate from most to least. It's not a perfect test, but it will give you an idea of your primary, secondary, and other styles, because they do have something to do with balancing factors that we will talk about before we finish. All right, let's go from there to the next page, Steve, if you would. And I'll work to leave a little bit of time for question and answers at the end after I go through the slides. But I broke them out here. As you can see at the very top, I've got the style, and underneath that would be these 4 forms of influence, 4 voices of influence. I've already mentioned the communication, so I've pulled that forward. What I want to get to here are the last 2 columns. So, again, some of you may be more naturally direct in your communication, and much of the time you will be, received as somebody who is direct, bottom line, to the point. Maybe you don't give people enough information for those that need more. You may be seen as overly demanding, even though perhaps you're not trying to be. Or you might be perceived as cold and uncaring, even though in your heart you feel like you care about people, but it's not being conveyed through your voice. So those could be just some of the things that you run into if you're more of a direct communicator. But let's talk about how to use this voice as a tool, because that's really the purpose of today's program. Your direct voice is good for warnings. If you can see that in that middle column, it's good for warnings, getting people to take evasive or different action. So if you think about some situations that make sense, perhaps in a military engagement, a commanding officer might say, get your head down before you get it shot off. That's short, direct, to the point. There's no misunderstanding that message. It takes a few seconds to deliver, and it is designed to strike a chord. And actually, that chord is where the biology comes in, because your communication can be tied to deeper motivations, such as opportunity for gain or fear of loss. which in this case, it would be fear of loss and worse, your life. So when the captain on the Titanic said, lower the lifeboats or everybody get your devices, whatever those may have been, I'm sure they fired a warning in a very direct voice that was readily heard and understood. So your direct voice has that impact. Now, if you use it all the time, of course, it will lose some of that impact. People will tune you out. But there is a time and a place to fire a warning. And that is generally when people are not on board with the objective and they need to be for your own good, for their own good, or the good of the organization. That when you use your direct voice, if you're not by nature a direct person, you have to sound like you mean it. That's why you may need to continue working on it. Cultivating it is a good word, developing it, and getting good at being matter of fact. You don't have to overdo. All you have to do is make sure you're being heard with what you're saying and that people are receiving your message accordingly. And then you can dial back or bump it up more as needed. If it's not your natural style, you'll have to work with it until you become better at it. It may never become second nature. And I want to say right now, that is a big problem with training and coaching. It's one really worth noting and highlighting here. And I experience it every day with my clients. If they're working to develop one side of their personality or one form of communication, they have to keep working on it. They'll get off to a good start in coaching, but they really have to persist in practicing. The moment you stop, if you give up in frustration and say, I'm not going to do this anymore, or I'm not getting it, then you begin to lose the benefits. They go away pretty quickly. But if you persist over time, one of two things will happen. You will get a percentage improvement. In other words, you'll be better more of the time and get a better result more of the time. And ultimately, you could arrive at a place where it does become second nature for you. But worst case scenario or medium case scenario, if you keep practicing, you'll continue to get improved results. Let's go to the inspiring, the second line down or third line down. I've already talked about how that communication sounds, spontaneous, upbeat, and so forth. Now, this voice as a tool or an instrument is best used for inspiring people or getting people to continue positive actions or raise the bar. So you want to use your inspiring voice when people are already on board with an objective and you just want to spark them to reach even higher. So that's where you hear the language. For somebody that's naturally inspiring, they tend to use language like, you got this, you the man, you the woman, you rock. All of that sort of thing. It comes out of their mouth in a way that reinforces the good behavior that's already happening, the success that's already occurring. Now, you don't necessarily want to use an inspiring voice when people are struggling or it's a time for a warning. That just isn't going to work as well. But when people are on board, that's the time to use your inspiring voice. So here, again, going back to the biology of the subject, the deeper issues, it strikes the opportunity for gain chord as a motivator. Not only am I doing great, but my leader believes I can do even greater. Watch this. So you're being challenged to aim a little bit higher. Like a pole vaulter, maybe you've raised the bar just a little bit, and now you're going to give it your best shot and see if you can get over that bar and set a new record. All right, let's drop to the third line, the supportive. Oops. Okay, so again, this is the voice that sounds warm, friendly, considerate, and caring. In my client base, again, averaging about 100 leaders per month, the majority of them are dominant type leaders. Life has given me a sweet spot of working with dominant style individuals, and they seem to enjoy my coaching because it gives them insights they had not otherwise considered. But one of the biggest challenges they face usually is getting that empathetic voice to come out so that people hear them and really hear that they care about them. I've heard a lot of dominant direct leaders say, I really don't care how people feel, I just want to get results. And sure, I understand that, but once they begin to recognize that if people think you care about them or feel like you care about them, they're more likely to work harder for you, then of course that rings, that strikes a note with them. So this voice is good for encouraging, getting people to take a first or one more step in the right direction. it's nudging people forward. Again, with my client base, most of them have kids, and a lot of them have young kids. There's one company here in town where I work with their leadership team, and I was shocked at the number of kids each of them had and how young they were. Like, wow, you guys are helping restock the American population, and that's a good thing. But a lot of our conversations revolved around how well they could use their empathetic voice with their kids to encourage them to convey that they care when somebody falls and skins a knee, instead of saying, well, watch what you're doing next time. So that voice is a great voice because it can get people unstuck or help them to take just one step forward. So that's when you want to use your supportive or encouraging voice. Yes, they're poised to take the next step, but they're hesitant. They're afraid. It could be anything. But your voice conveys a "you can do it" message, but in a little bit calmer, gentler way. Bobby, let's just take this next step. Let's not worry about 2 or 3, but let's take the next one. Or, Sally, I've seen you do really well in this area so far. Let's see if we can take the mission one step further by getting this next part completed. So again, it's not just the words, of course, but it's the tone of voice, and the tone is critical here. So this may be one place where I weigh in very carefully on what I've observed about our 2 current presidential candidates. And again, I want to be very careful, so if you can, in your mind, differentiate, I'm talking about communication, not your politics. One thing that comes up a lot about Donald Trump, and when I used to just talk about the president 2 years ago before I stopped, because of the hostility in the audience. If you listen to how his speeches are written, going all the way back to any State of the Union addresses given, the speechwriters factor in a lot of empathetic language that would suggest to listeners, I care about you, I'm doing my best on your behalf, I want you to have a better life and America to be a better place. So the language is there. But what I hear from others that I talk with about this subject is that they're not hearing the empathy. So, of course, it's not just your words, but it's the match of the words, the tone of voice, and, the body language that goes with it that makes you believable, understandable, and credible. So even though those things may be factored into that particular individual's speeches, they're not necessarily being heard. Now, on the other hand, if you listen to Joe Biden as a candidate, you pretty readily hear his supportive voice coming through. Again, just to be fair to both parties, because I want to be objective in saying this, it doesn't necessarily mean that he does care about the hearer, but at least that he does convey the message clearly, an empathetic message clearly. And yes, somebody can do either without necessarily feeling the emotion. So you've got 2 different candidates that are coming across in 2 very different ways. But the supportive is there. Regardless of what you're communicating, it has to be believable. That's part of being heard. So it's got to resonate with the listener. If something's not resonating, then the message needs to be adjusted so it's more matched between words, voice, and of course the body language. Let's go to the last one, the logical voice. I've come to appreciate this voice more over time. Even though it is factual, impersonal, it doesn't have the same sort of, emotional impact for persuasion. It is good, as you can see in that middle column, for reasoning, getting people to become cool, calm, and collected, and to take a look at the facts. So it is a powerful voice. It's one that's guided our national history through the most important documents that have been written, that support the United States as a nation. So that voice of reason has always been very important to us as a nation and as citizens. It makes a rational argument for taking certain action. Again, the unfortunate thing is, as much as we would like people to be rational, they are moved more by emotion. Studies I've seen show anywhere from a little bit to a lot. So in this case, emotion tends to be a more powerful force of influence than reason. But it doesn't mean, in most cases, if you're working to be persuasive with an audience or an individual, group or individual, often it is a mix anyway of the logic and the emotion. All right, so there's the 4 voices of influence. Let me recap this slide and we'll move towards the end of the presentation. You have at your disposal at least 4 different voices that you can use as tools or instruments. For each of you, you probably have 1 or 2 of these voices that come naturally. So you just do it without thinking. For most of you, you have 1 or 2 that you would need to work on so that you could be more believable and get the result you're seeking by better connecting with your audience and being heard. All right, let's go to the next slide. Balancing and climbing. So this is where I want to refer a little bit to my work with leaders over the years. I've observed that practically every leader, in fact, I've never met one that didn't have some challenge that stood above the rest, that if they could get that mastered or managed, life would go more smoothly for them. And almost always, it is a balancing factor. So, for example, if you're more of a direct communicator, or if you're too direct, or you're that way all the time, then perhaps you need to work on your supportive, caring, empathetic voice to balance that out. Most of the time, that would be the voice that goes into the shadows and the one that people would like to hear more of from you. So this very morning, with one leader, I talked with that individual about the importance of balancing. Now, with this particular leader, it was the other way around. It was a very supportive leader. And over the past year and a half in working with this leader, we talked a lot about how that individual is very strong with their supportive voice. It's their primary voice. But their ongoing challenge is to cultivate more of that direct, matter of fact, to the point voice in ways that are useful, again, not ways that are overbearing. And if you're more of a supportive type individual, I can assure you, unless you get backed into a corner, you're probably not going to come across offensive when you speak to people more directly or in just simply a matter-of-fact manner. Most of the time it will work very well for you. In fact, most supportive leaders I work with are able to do it better than naturally born direct types. So again, it's a skill that they can hone and use in a way that's just right for the situation. Okay, so you might ask yourself, am I too direct? If so, what would my balancing factor be? Or number 2, if you're too inspiring, always optimistic, a few things may happen that are less than favorable for you. If you're too inspiring, you may come across as overpromising and underdelivering. You just tend to get excited about things, you're enthusiastic, you're excited for yourself and for others and certain things. So you overpromise or you overstate and people take you at your word and then they're disappointed when you don't come through. When maybe that's not what you intended. Or you did intend, but then you just didn't have the wherewithal to deliver the goods. So be careful of that. Or sometimes inspiring people can be overly complimentary. Be complimentary of others, but at a certain point it won't ring true or is credible if you overdo it. So perhaps that may be balanced out by being a little bit more logical, reasonable, factual, so forth. Just for example, I've already talked about what happens if you're too supportive. Most likely you'll have to balance that out by cultivating more of your direct voice. And if you're too logical, reasonable, factual, like Mr. Spock on the old Star Treks, if you remember those, Star Trek always has a character that fulfills this place of being too logical or naturally logical, then probably your balancing factor would have something to do with the emotional side of communication. You may have to work on being more supportive or empathetic, or you may have to work on being more outgoing and inspiring. But again, for every leader that I have worked with over the years, each one has an area that stands above the rest, that if they could get that mastered or managed, life would go more easily or smoothly for them. And almost always it is their balancing factor. So with that in mind, let's go to the next slide, balancing, to stay on this theme of balancing. And I'm just going to stay here for a moment. If you think about your own development as a leader, at some point you probably started at that bottom rung. Like most human beings, you were reactive. It's a very normal state of development where it's all about me. But at some point, we matured to the next level up the rung to responsive, where we realized, well, it's about you and me. And I would bet that all of you on the call today have certainly paid your dues in the responsive level of leadership, or just simply being a civil human being. You're responsive day in and day out. Things come up, you address them. Problems arise, you work to solve them. Things go sideways, you aim to straighten them out. And a lot of that is done through your verbal skill. You're a very responsive person. And then many of you in the room, and I did look at the names earlier, perhaps all of you have at least a foot, if not more, in this higher level of being proactive, where you realize that it's simply about all of us. And that perhaps at your level of leadership, you're responsible for all the people, all the paychecks, all the moving parts, all the equipment, all the clients, and so forth. So your view there, of course, changes. It becomes much more mature, and the need for balance is critical. All right. So let's then go to Steve, if you would. This would be the last set of questions that I have for you today to wrap up the presentation. I mentioned that each leader has something that if they could master or manage it, life would go more smoothly. So then the question is, do I master or do I manage it? So sometimes it's not worth the effort, or you're not going to make the effort, or you've given up on the effort to change a behavior, communication behavior. And if you have, that's okay, as long as you've got a plan B. And often that plan B means finding somebody else to work with you who can do that. So if you're the good cop, they become the bad cop, or vice versa, or something that complements your style and brings a better, broader range of communication to your organization. So the first question would be, can I speak plainly? Am I the type of person that can be direct when I need to be, or do I avoid it? Do I simply want to reserve the right to stay popular or distant, so I need a hired gun? If so, you wouldn't be the first leader in history to have somebody that can do their dirty work, so to speak, for them, or make things clear that are more difficult for them to clarify. Can I generate excitement, or do I need a cheerleader? Many leaders I work with are just simply not good at this voice of inspiration or being inspiring or getting excited. Some are, but many are not. So they have somebody in their organization that can serve that role, or work with them, team up with it, can carry that out. Number 3, can I be a peacemaker? Or do I need an intermediary? And that's often the case. Direct types, sometimes they just can't seem to get the part about slowing down, being empathetic, and showing they care about others. It's too much work, too difficult, or they just don't want to do it, so they team up with somebody who can. So again, you get, for lack of a better phrase, the good cop, bad cop pairing as needed. And the last one, can I reason with others? Am I good at reasoning, or am I simply not? I know some leaders that are. I had one say to me, Rich, I understand that I'm a very difficult person to be around. But they've got a great team, a great organization, a great growing company, and I mean, really, their business is on fire nationally. But this individual has people in place that can serve as maybe a negotiator, or maybe that's not the right word, but somebody that can bring that reasonable voice to the table. The cool, calm, collected need to have some rational conversation. So there's some good questions to ask yourself in wrapping up today. Just recap. Our presentation today was, if you can't communicate, how can you lead? Based on the idea that over the course of history, the key skill set for leaders has been their verbal or communication ability, coupled with their greatest asset, which would be credibility. I broke that out into 4 voices of influence, since it is important for you to be able to influence others to get on board with a particular objective and collaborate with you towards that end. And then I broke it down into some of the nuts and bolts, which I use in coaching to help people actually piece that together and practice it until they become better or more proficient at that skill. And I put it in the context, hopefully, in your leadership development as to how you mature and why it's important for you to balance these things out so you can continue having increased success. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to Steve. I might have run a little bit long, and I apologize for that, but we did get the bases covered. And Steve, if you would like me to answer questions, I'm willing to, or if we don't have the time, I'm okay with that too. Back to you, sir.
Thank you, Rich. Excellent program. I appreciate very much your expertise and sharing it with us today. The
You're
first
welcome.
question is, can we share the PowerPoint that you used today?
Yes, you can. You have permission to share that, and there should not be anything in there that's not shareable.
So I'll say anybody that wants that, just send me an email, and if enough of you ask, I'll just send it out to everybody. Are there any other questions?
This is Raymond Powers. Rich, how often do you have to deal with the issue of trust in working with leaders?
Great question. Every day. In every case, it's a factor, sometimes more than other times. But times when trust is a really big issue, I probably have to deal with that with, I would have to ballpark it, but probably, 1 out of every 5 or 10 leaders has some aspect of trust they have to work through, either with a board of directors or their leadership team or individuals that answer to them directly. This week I have talked with one individual that's working to cultivate a much greater degree of trust and credibility with their board. Usually the goal of getting that trust and credibility is so that things will speed up. Some of you may remember not only the famous Stephen Covey, who passed away a few years ago, but his son, who wrote the book, The Speed of Trust. And his primary point in that book is that when trust is high, things speed up because we don't have second guessing. That enhances productivity and ultimately profitability. But he reversed it and said also when trust is low, all of those things are impacted, including the bottom line. So again, to answer your question, it's always a part of the conversation, but with some leaders more than others, and probably about every 1 out of 5 or 10, there's a significant issue there that needs to be addressed.
Thanks.
So Rich, an
Yes.
interval guest, great
Hi, Anita.
presentation. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, I can.
So my question is, of the 4 voices, the styles, which do you feel you used in your presentation today? All of the above?
That's a great question, Anita. Hopefully, yes. I know that as a teacher, I tend to lean more towards my C or cautious or logical voice because I'm breaking things down for people. But for about 10 years, when I worked as a keynote speaker at conventions, it was critical to mix all 4 very carefully to hit all points in an audience and move them between reason and emotion so that the message could land more effectively. But I would say today, at least from my perspective, I probably leaned a little bit more towards the logical. What did you hear?
I felt more towards the logical, and that would be logical for what your purpose was.
Yes. If I were in front of you today at our former haunts in the downtown Ramada as a large group, I'm sure it would have come out differently.
Yes. Don't we wish?
Yes, for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much, Rich. I'm going to turn it back to Marie to close us out.
All right. Thank you, Steve. And I'm going to hang in there with Marie as she closes out.
Yes, thank you, Rich. That was wonderful. Just
You're welcome.
very much reached my psychology heart and brain. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So our next week's program is Stanley Adams from the Kansas Department of Commerce, and the topic is rural and school broadband access in Kansas, and that is also near and dear to my heart. We are starting to see families coming in to use the library as a place to do remote learning, bringing in their Chromebooks and to do the remote learning because they don't have the access to the internet that they need to be able to be effective with schooling. So this is incredibly timely. I wanted to also give an opportunity for announcements before we end, and I did want to share that Allison Marker shared that the YWCA is hosting their 32nd annual Women of Excellence event virtually on Wednesday, September 16th from 6 to 7, and the event is free to attend. But it's still a main fundraiser, which really focuses in on the work that the YWCA does, which is to provide support, safety, and shelter to survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking, our vital youth services programs, and certainly racial justice and advocacy. So if you have an opportunity, I would encourage you to attend. I want to open it up to anybody who would like to share any additional announcements they might have. Okay. Well, then I'm going to ask for everybody to unmute so we can do the four-way test. Okay. Of the things we think,
say,
say, or do, is it the truth?
Is it fair to all
concerned? Will it be a good will and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Will it be fun? And is it kind? Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for joining us, Stan, from your vacation. And I look forward to seeing everybody next Thursday.
See you next week.
Have a great day.
Okay.
Good job.
Bye.